We're
We're
back.
back. Yeah, we had a week off and I missed our time together last week, but was having a fun adventure out west.
Yeah, I definitely felt it. I was like, oh my gosh, it feels like forever, but we only skipped 1 week. This is a good habit, like where it's like, I need it. I love these conversations. So
Yeah.
ready to be back at it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So, we're talking today about boundaries without guilt. And I'm excited to see just all the places that we go, and especially just hearing from people who might be joining us today on kind of what are their struggles they might have with boundaries, or where does guilt, potentially creep in for them. I think all of us can relate to this in different ways in different areas of our life. And so, I'll just kick it to you, Nikki. I think when you're thinking of the subject, like when you knew that we were going to be talking about this, what was coming to mind for you?
It's been a journey of learning how to do this, and by no means do I do it right all the time, but I know that I used to live in guilt a lot because I would say yes and then be very frustrated with myself, when you're like driving to that thing and you're like, why am I going here? And a lot less of that. So I've got more peace around saying no and being like proud of saying no. I did think through a number of examples of things I used to do in the past, or maybe some others do now, just to be like, okay, what are examples of this? So I'm ready to share those whenever you want to. But I think the peace that it brings is really powerful.
I think it is good for us to reflect on, like, how do we know when we're living out of alignment? Because I think it's easy for us to believe that boundaries are this thing that's like we have a toxic relationship and we need to set boundaries and we need to, kind of tell people how to treat us. And I think that, yes, that is one version of a boundary, but a boundary could be as simple, like you mentioned, of I really want to say no, but I said yes. And
Mhm.
so, what, how do I reflect back? So I'd love to go through some different examples that come up for you.
Yeah, yeah. So, taking on a project when your plate is full, you're saying yes because you're like, I don't want to be seen as lazy or not a team player. So I'm going to say yes, but I clearly know I am overextended right now. And then what happens? You are overwhelmed. You're not happy and flowing and doing the thing. You're dropping balls on other things because you only have so much time. So it's taking from other things. You might be resentful, right? So just saying yes to like projects or engagements. Um, what about, the boundary of like shutting off work? So, I'm continuing to check and respond to emails at 10 p.m. or during dinner. If I don't respond, I look like I'm not committed and I want to look like the star player. And, to your family, you're mentally elsewhere, disconnected from those that you love, right? And you're just draining yourself. Um, I could go on, but those are, I think, two that a lot of us have struggled with or do.
I think it's good for us to reflect on, like, what are some of the stories that I'm believing are true that have me acting out of alignment of what I really want and desire. And it could be, we've talked about values before when we spoke about our human design, and
Mhm.
we were talking about our different styles. What it made me think of is the times that I've not set boundaries with what my energy needed, or even like what felt more true to me because I felt like I needed to be something. Like I felt like, to your point of I can't shut off work because it tells this story. I think there's been plenty of times in my life where I have given false yeses because I felt like there was something to like prove or do or achieve. And it was more more driving towards an outcome and really like being miserable on the journey.
Mhm.
So I think it can creep up in a whole lot of different ways for us. It doesn't just come. I think that another like misnomer is that like only people pleasers have a hard time setting boundaries. And
Mhm.
I don't think that's true. I think we all do in our different ways.
Yeah, I think it could actually come to life in the Cartman's drama triangle, the three different types. You could think about the examples in each. It's not always just the people pleaser type. There's these different versions of, like the guilt could be, oh, if I don't reply fast, if I don't reply immediately, they're going to think I don't care, that I'm slacking, right? Or maybe like a problem that someone else is having. You know how we were just talking about this over the weekend with some friends that, someone comes to you with a problem and they're like calling and slacking or texting, and in an hour they're probably going to figure it out. Happens a lot of times, and you're sometimes thinking like, oh, if I don't help, I'm being selfish or not kind to help them. And it's like, I mean, we don't have to be the go-to that fixes everything. Like, we can allow others to take the time to do that. It's not like an immediate. And when we do that, then others just expect that all the time. And you're like creating this like vibe of like just always on, just nervous system's fried, right? Yeah.
It's the guilt also, like that guilt loop that creeps in. I think about it, like I reflect as my role as a mom, and to think of the guilt that would come through when it was like you're at work, you feel guilty because you might be missing something, or you're not with your kids, or they're at a babysitter instead of being home with you. And then when you're with your kids, you're feeling guilty because maybe you had to leave early, and like there's certainly this guilt loop that can come up in many different roles. I remember experiencing it in the role as mom. And what I had to tell myself is like, guilt is an option, it's not a requirement. That feeling guilty at any given time with whatever boundary we've set, like the boundary is, I decided to show up to this thing for my kids, so I said no to this meeting, or whatever. Like whatever the boundary is that we've set, the determination is that we've set, feeling guilty does not equate caring more. Like, we don't have to feel guilt in order to care. And I really had to teach myself that, of like, it is an option, not a requirement. It doesn't mean that I care any less if I just choose to let go of this feeling of guilt, and I just fully accept the space that I'm holding right now. Wherever I am, wherever my feet is, how can I get my head there quickly so that I can avoid the guilt loop?
Mm. I think the parenting one is a very pronounced boundary example for people. Maybe we go there for a minute and kind of work through that. Where, Amy, like, how did you get to this time or ability or whatever that is, where you're like, I both can exist. I can, say no to this as a mom. And maybe it's to protect time for you. Like, maybe you just need recharge time,
Mhm.
and you're like, I am completely okay with that. And I did have to say no to the boys or one of the boys. Like, what do you have to do to like lay that foundation where you can be at peace with that and both can exist? You're like, I am a loving mom and I'm taking time to, I don't know, go to the spa, like, because you just need a recharge time.
Mhm. I think I mean, it is a practice of, once the decision has been made, just like stick with it, be okay with it, because and that is a matter of being able to manage the bitch in the attic, because the bitch in the attic wants to dwell, and it wants to, shoulda, coulda, woulda. It wants to kind of live in two parallel realities, and in truth, you're only living in one at any given time. Like, the space I'm holding right now is the only one that's true. And suffering is something I create more in my mind than in my reality. So how do I just make peace with what's happening? It really is a practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think it is like, just giving yourself permission, and then paying attention to what is that story loop. And I think this is true for, anything that we're trying to rewrite the story of, because a lot of boundary setting is us getting rid of whatever we believed was true about the thing. Like, back to your point of, if I'm not working past 5, they're going to think I'm late. Like, they're going to think I'm lazy, or these are all stories we've carried around with us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's learning how to operate from that self-fulfilling prophecy that we've talked about in the past, that our beliefs influence our judgments motivate our actions create our results, and our results confirm our thinking. The way that we make lasting change is to catch that judgment action loop. And so if you can catch yourself in the judgment of yourself, judgment of your decision, judgment of your boundaries, if you can catch the judgment and then learn how to kind of breathe and bring yourself to the present moment, that's becomes the new action. Then you can rewire the automatic trigger that goes to guilt, the automatic trigger that goes to self-judgment. We just have to do it enough times to create a
Mm.
new belief system that it's okay, that you've earned this time, that it's okay to give yourself what you need and to honor your own needs and desires.
Mm. I think that's so good. Yeah. Consistency is where the magic happens in this, because every time we like reinforce that boundary and practice it, we're really telling ourselves that like our needs matter. Like I got to keep my cup filled. I don't want to lose
Mhm.
my shit later, like, and I know what I need to do for myself, and that consistency is, yeah, really key. What do you do when you will give it maybe an example of when you have practiced a boundary and the person pushed back?
Mm.
They didn't respect that or whatever.
Yeah, I think I mean, part of the things that we have to kind of, a misnomer is that a boundary is set one. I just set a boundary once and then it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I set a boundary and somebody reacts badly, like something's wrong here. I think those are quite normal. And as we've talked about before, like boundaries aren't some wall that we build and then it's just like, okay, nobody can get in here now, like it's done. It's more of a gate, and we are the gatekeeper. We get to decide who we open the gate to. So boundaries are something that we are the ones that have to enforce and reinforce, and really create our own space of what we're willing and not willing to tolerate. And if somebody breaks a boundary, it's likely because we opened the gate, or
Mm-hmm.
we left the gate open. And then so much of that is our responsibility to, uphold, and to just, be very, very clear about what we are and are not willing to tolerate. I think if
Mm-hmm.
we're not clear about that, then we're going to let people slowly walk over those boundaries. We may not notice at first, and then it becomes a much bigger issue over time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what it sounds like to practice healthy boundaries, like responses, whether somebody is pushing us or they're just asking a question and we just respond in confidence that we're saying no or drawing that boundary.
Mhm.
Something like, that's not something that I can commit to at this time. Or, I protect my mornings for focus work, so I can't do that meeting at that time you're proposing, like 8 a.m., but let's connect in the afternoon. What do you have available?
Mhm.
Or maybe like Slack. So Slack for our team, we use that. We love that. But we all practice like turning off our notifications, or it'll like just take over our lives. Or when do you set your boundary on Slack? So hey, talking to someone, I unplug from Slack at 6, but I'll
Mhm.
be back tomorrow morning, right?
Mhm.
Um, any other examples of like what that looks like lived out?
Yeah, I think if we're looking at work things, those are really good, to sort of be like, here is like availability, right? If we think about the different types of boundaries that we set, there's like physical boundaries, which is, okay, I don't want you to touch me. Like, I'm
Mhm.
not a hugger. I have a friend who's very much not a hugger. And, I am a hugger. And so like being able to respect that, there's touch, there's space, there's your personal items. There may be things that you're like, you don't want your kids to get into, or you don't want your spouse to get into. There's emotional boundaries of just, sometimes we can be the dumping ground of other people's things. And then we feel like we've got to carry it around. So, are there emotional boundaries that we need to create so that we don't become kind of the dumping ground for people?
Mhm.
There's time and energy boundaries. So, like what you're talking about is, yeah, how do I want to spend my time? And you and I were talking before we popped on, and I said, I rarely take meetings after 4 o'clock. Like, I just am kind of done by then. Could I? Yes. Like, are there times I have to? Yes. But like 4 o'clock's kind of my like no meetings after 4. And I'm okay with that. That's not everybody's thing. So time energy is one of them. There's another that's like
Mhm.
mental boundaries. Like, what do we need to do to really protect our belief systems or our thoughts? And there may be things like political or religious or whatever that you create a boundary around because having those certain conversations are not helpful for you, right?
Yeah.
And I think also now in this day and age, there's like some digital boundaries that we experience too. And just like maybe it's no phones at the dinner table. When we're going to respond to your point, like those are the various types of boundaries that we are experiencing. And so if I think of the formula, like no matter what it is, whether it's time, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, I think clarity is our first step of like,
Hmm.
what does this truly look like?
Hmm.
What do I need? How do I want to show up? What am I willing or unwilling to, say yes to or experience? As our friend Desta said, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no.
Hmm.
So like really getting clear on that, I think is first. I think number two is being able to communicate that clarity with kindness,
Hmm.
because you know, I think that the another misnomer is like people should just know. They should just know that's not okay. They should just know that's a boundary. And in truth, like I'm using quotes here, okay, or what's good or bad or what's a boundary is in the eye of the beholder and based on our experience. So it's our responsibility to communicate clearly and kindly. If we want to truly be conscious, mixing those two things together are really important. And I think we can do it with just certainty in our voice,
Yeah.
hey, this time I am not at my best at this time of day. Here's
Yeah.
what would work better for me. How does that look for you? And I think it's just, yeah, stating it very clearly, kindly, and then offering other options. Consistency. That's another piece is like you meant, it's not a one and done thing.
Hmm.
We've got to remind people and say, hey, here's where I am. And guess what? There may be, whether it's clients, whether it's jobs that you have, maybe it's other relationships, there may be people who do not respect those boundaries. And then we have a decision to make of how long we're willing to tolerate that.
Mm.
um, if they want to tell us our boundary is wrong, if they want to, if there's no respect there, we get to decide what we want to do with that information. And I think the last part that comes to mind is just like continuing to take extreme ownership, that remember that how people respond to you is not, it's not your responsibility. Like boundaries are work. We get to own how we think, feel, and respond. We do not get to own, nor should we ever own how someone else thinks, feels, and responds.
Mm. Yes. So you were talking about getting clear first, and that takes us back. There's so many common threads in these conversations. We have to do the work to know our own core values and who we want to show up to be. And to your point on, we can't expect others to just know the things that are important to us boundary wise. Like we have to know ourselves. We got to do that deep work to know what is a hell yes, or I mean, mostly what are the hell no's,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to know those things. And to your point on some of those examples I was giving, a lot of them were work related. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone that is really strong with their boundaries, like you just really respect their response, that says something like, you know i'm I'm working on staying out of conversations that feel like gossip, because like I'm practicing this myself. I don't want to be in that. That's not who I am. But you're, in a conversation with somebody you care about, and they start to talk about someone, and it's like, I don't want to be that, but and you're really standing for it, so they don't walk away later and you're like, why did I just sit in that conversation, and start to communicate too about that. I'm working on staying out of conversations that feel like gossip, or maybe someone is sharing something really heavy, and it's starting to bring up some emotional things for you, and you might say, hey, I can hold space for this right now, but I can't take this on. Or you might say, would it be okay if we shift topics for now? Maybe we come back to that later. Some of those are like, man, when you're with someone and that's how they respond, it's, you can't help but be respectful of that.
Yeah, I think it's we have to be mindful of the energy vampires, as we've all kind of heard that phrase. And then yeah, how do we advocate for what we need or what we are or are not willing to tolerate? And I think it's the, boundaries are a nod to being able to live in our own authenticity. And as we've talked about, like that's the highest state for any of us, is to be truly aligned with our own authenticity. And I also want to, I believe I've heard somebody kind of ask the question in the past to that, like, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. That is like, oh, is that a way to avoid discomfort? And I think that that's a differentiation to make, is it's,
Mm.
you know, it may be something is scary and it's new and it's different. And so our instant reaction, like internal reaction, is no, I don't want to do that, because we fight to stay comfortable. But if we are truly aligned with our full body, yes, what does it mean? And by the way, the body knows yes far faster than the brain does. Like if we can really learn how to embody sort of a somatic yes, and there are ways to do that. But if we can really get aligned with our yes, with our values and where we're going, and we're clear on our vision, then we know whether a hell yes is based out of comfort or it's based out of misalignment. And I think that's an important distinction to make as we learn how to set our boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that foundational work is so key because it allows us to step into it with confidence because we know who we are, right? And then the consistency comes in because we're practicing it regularly, authentically to who we've stated we want to be and we're holding ourselves to. And it's just this regular practice. That's really good.
Yeah, I think it's, it's helpful for us as if you're listening and you're curious about, kind of doing this and looking at the areas of life, I think a good place to start is just what feels off.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any area of life that feels off? You're so great about utilizing the, life wheel. And is there something off in finances? Like, is there a boundary I need to set with myself with spending or saving or investing? What does that look like? Boundaries are not always, do not always have to have someone else involved. Sometimes they're things that we're doing with ourselves. How does my health feel? Is there a boundary I need to set to prioritize that? What about our relationships? Are there boundaries I need to set that allow us to be on the same page and to prioritize time together? Like, I think really reflecting over all of the areas of life can give us some really good feedback over what we need to prioritize and kind of draw the line of what we're willing to take from ourselves and from others.
Mm-hmm. I think we should go there for a minute to go a little deeper into these different categories. Like when you said life wheel, right? These conversations always shine a light for me on things that I'm like, oh, I would have never thought about that, until I really thought about it. So in finances, examples would be loaning money out of maybe guilt, right? Someone asked for money, but you're like, I really can't do this right now, but I did, or, I am taking on an expense that I am wishfully thinking I can afford, but I can't. And then it's creating all this stress, right? So, finances, you talked about health and wellness. Like I told myself, I am going to get 3 strength trainings in this week. I am going to walk 3 days this week. And then when we don't, we're not honoring it. We're not, that's a boundary because that's what we need, or taking supplements. What are other ones? We talked about parenting, talked about some work stuff.
I think friendships too. I think if we look at friendships, maybe there's things that we want, need, or expect out of our friends. And I think that we often, like, back to that, we assume people should just know. And sometimes setting a boundary is just sharing what you need or want. Sometimes it's just being very clear of like, hey, I really appreciate this, or I don't appreciate this, or, I think it happens in all of our relationships in life, but certainly I have a past experience of someone who is a close friend to me who just ghosted out of nowhere, just completely, like, never heard from them again. And what I suspect is there was a boundary I didn't know about that was crossed in some way that I don't know about, that, it led to that experience. And I really wish that it would have been stated, because then at least I could have said, like, yes, I can meet this, or no, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's times that we just assume that people should know what our expectations are. And then we feel disappointed when they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, yeah, looking at the what life wheel in particular, but it could be that area of friendship comes to mind for me of what are we stating clearly versus what are we assuming people should know?
So good. I think that's part of that, like step one on, we have to get clear first. And when we know ourselves, we have that clarity. If someone chooses to like ghost us or whatever, like we know our truth of, I mean, I did or I didn't. Like you could take ownership if there was something, right? Maybe reach out with an apology or whatever. But if there wasn't, it's like it's really not yours to own, and you can feel peace around that, and
Mhm.
choose how you'll be when they maybe come back around. Or yeah.
And I think health is one that's interesting too, because I believe that we may have goals for ourselves that we let others undo for us. Like let's say the goal is like, oh, I don't want to drink. I want to stop drinking, or I want to cut back. I want to drink less. But you're hanging out with friends, or maybe you've got a partner that drinks, or whatever, and we easily will let that boundary down, in order, to meet where somebody else is, to make them more comfortable with our presence, or at least that's the story we tell ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's just one, health is one example, but I think it's so helpful for us to reflect on what am I abandoning within myself and making someone else's responsibility. Like it's true at the end of the day, it truly is our decision to do that. It's our decision of what we want to say yes to, no to, what we want to be disciplined to, what we want to surround ourselves with. And every time we uphold a boundary, I think we teach ourselves to trust us, to really trust like our own judgment, to trust our own yes, to trust our own no. I think the life wheel is just, I'm going to do this practice too, Nikki. I've already like written it down. I'm starting to write my areas in to be like, okay, is there an area in life that I'm abandoning my own boundaries, AKA value systems, personal promises, et cetera, in order to appease something else? Like maybe it's a temporary, joy, a temporary pleasure. Maybe it's people pleasing, like whatever. I think it's a really good reflection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as a leader, for modeling the way for others, when we value ourselves and we say things like, I don't feel comfortable um, conversing in this conversation or continuing this conversation, or I need to take a break. Some of those more bold, respectful statements, let alone the health commitments that we keep or financials or how we treat others,
Mhm.
we're really modeling, I value myself. Like you've said before, you're like, the only person that you're going to be with from the time you start on earth until the time you leave is yourself. And modeling that, like, I value myself, and others, see that we're really training others to do the same with those statements that we share. And just, it's just a great way to lead.
Yeah, I think there is a meditate on this episode called "Rewrite the Rules," and that's a good episode for when we get stuck in some of these stories that keep us living a life that we don't like or we don't want, and to help us write some of those boundaries, hold some of those boundaries more deeply. So as we wrap up today, I'll kind of share what it is that we went through and some things that you might be able to do with that. So I think it's helpful, as we were talking about, is just identify an area where you feel out of alignment. Maybe it's like, I feel resentful, I feel burned out, I feel, tired, exhausted by this, whatever the case might be. And I think Life Wheel is a helpful exercise from that. But going through and just identifying, is there an area, that I can really focus on? And the next step may be just practicing a no, like one no. What's one no in that area this week that you could set up? No is a complete sentence. It doesn't require explanation. It just requires your determination to uphold it. Where could we say no this week that honors that space and that boundary? And I think it's helpful to even journal at times if we aren't sure. Stream of consciousness can be really helpful. Maybe it's a journaling of, I love question and answer journaling. Like, where do I feel drained right now? And you would be surprised how many answers come through when we just allow our brain to flow through. Even like what boundary might help. What do I need to say no more often to? I think journaling can be a very helpful prompt as well.
So good. Well, I hope that this conversation inspires some more peace. Maybe feels liberating, might feel uncomfortable with some of those practices of no's, but it really is empowering over time, and just a great tool for our toolbox. Like, how do we consistently consistency. That's the key. How do we consistently practice these boundaries to be our best self? So
Yeah.
good.
Awesome. We're going to take the conversation over to the conscious conversations thread, and I will share kind of some of my boundary setting I'm going to go for this week. So
I love it.
look forward to that
Okay.
conversation. Okay. Have a great rest of your week.
Yep. Happy Tuesday. See you
Bye.
next week. Bye.